Hello there and welcome back to Laurence Plays Factorio Planetary Pioneers, and you join me once again on Lignumis because we've actually started using one of the big exports from this planet. And no, I'm not talking about the steam science, although I'm pleased to see that that has caught up once again. No, I'm actually talking about the blue circuits, and these, as you can see up here by the fact that this box is virtually empty, have suddenly come under rather heavy demand. And that's because the Richard Dean Anderson has been picking them up from here and taking them over to Vulcanus, where they can be then put into the system where we had a bit of a shortage of blue circuits beforehand, and making them over here on Lignumis is much cheaper than anywhere else, so we've been doing that. And that's led to a few interesting, I hesitate to call them problems, but we've had to fix up a few things, shall we say. Firstly, the reason we've been able to start shipping them up is because now the blue circuits, you can fit 300 of them into a rocket. Previously you could only fit 30 in, and that was due to a slight glitch in the Lignumis mod and the way it interacted with something else and how things were calculated. That has now been fixed, so we can now fit 300 in a rocket, which means it's now worthwhile to launch them up to the spaceship. So that you can see this ship is on its way to somewhere, probably over to Lignumis at the moment. Yes, it's on its way to Lignumis, and it's got a request here for 600 of those processing units, so that's 2 rocket loads. As you saw, we don't actually have that many at the moment, so it's going to be a bit disappointed when it gets there, but that's just because it's been flying in and taking away quite so many of them. And so, because we've discovered that we're not actually producing them fast enough, well, we've done a little bit of looking into that, and we found a few problems, and we fixed at least some of them. So if we have a look back around here, you can see they're coming out of these machines over here where we're pumping a load of steam up the middle here. We've got wood pulp coming in from the side, we've got plastic and gold cable coming in on the other side. Okay, great. So we can tell at a glance, actually, just looking at this, we seem to have shortages of basically all of the solid ingredients, which is quite an achievement because these are running flat out, the plastic is running basically flat out, pretty close, and the gold cable is running flat out as well. So it looks like we're going to have to increase all of those because we have plenty of machines, but there's quite a lot of them that just straight up aren't able to run because they haven't got the resources they need. And so speeding this up is going to be a case of improving all those things. However, during the last stream, the problem was that we didn't have enough plastic coming in, or at least that was the most obvious problem. And I traced that back along here and discovered it was because we didn't have enough wood pulp coming in to keep these systems happy, to keep these running and producing more of the Cupriavidus nicators, which we need to then turn into the plastic over here. It now looks like, well, these systems are running quite nicely, so I guess we're going to need to put in another copy of this up here to get a bit more plastic coming through. We're also going to need more gold cable to be made, which means more assembly machines up here, and perhaps a faster belt running up the middle. And also, we seem to have a bit of a shortage of these circuits. But you'll also note that we required the wood pulp for the circuits as well, so that was another limiting factor. And so, when we first looked at it, we had plenty of most of the ingredients, but we had a shortage of plastic and a shortage of wood pulp, and the shortage of plastic was due to the shortage of wood pulp. And so, I tasked Tristan with expanding the wood process growing over here, and he did something which I didn't really expect, which actually in hindsight is a really good idea. So he's put in a load of extra tree growing over here. That's not the clever thing, that was really obvious. But what he's doing is, instead of shipping it out on the belt with all the rest of the wood, he's putting it straight into assembly machines over here that can then convert it with some steam that's being brought in separately into the wood pulp, which can then be taken out, fill up the pipes, and then passed out along a long pipe down here and passed over into the rest of the system. We've got a little bit of control system going on over here to make sure we only pump this through when this tank isn't quite full, and that's because over here the recipe where you actually make the plastic produces a small amount of the wood pulp, and so that's going to be being fed back into the system, so we need to make sure we always have a little bit of headroom available for that. And so, with that extra supply of wood pulp, you can see we've now got, things are running reasonably well. We're producing a quantity of the blue circuits. And if we look back over the last hour, you can see previously it was wibbling around 40 per minute, I think, along here, with the peaks and troughs. Then there was a massive drop here as we ran out of all kinds of stuff. And now it's been fixed. We've gone up to a nice healthy 72 per minute. It's still not quite as high as I'd like it to be. I think we are going to need to do some expansion of that. But for now, it's not doing too badly. Oh, and there we go. There's some blue circuits being launched up to the Richard Dean Anderson, which is parked up in orbit over here. However, we don't yet have enough blue circuits in this in the chest over here to fill up another rocket, so unfortunately this ship is probably going to depart unsatisfied. Yes, after the 120 seconds of activity. So, oh well, never mind, it'll cope, I'm sure. Another similar problem we were running into was a shortage of the wooden circuits that are being made over here, and that turned out to be related to the wood pulp problem because we just didn't have enough wood coming through. So because there wasn't enough wood, there wasn't enough lumber. That was starving the system over here, and we weren't able to make all of the wooden circuits we needed. That has now been fixed because, as I said, we now have plenty of wood available and therefore plenty of lumber. However, it does look like we could perhaps do with a little bit of an upgrade over here, having gone up to red belts. Maybe having each machine feeding onto both sides of the belt so we can get a little bit more coming out of this one, because at the moment we can see this one is not working to the fullest extent that it is capable of. So I could come in along here and say I'd like you to be a near, and then we go set some of those to be on the near side, and then we can have a little bit more coming out. That said, the shortage over here does seem to actually be wood related once again, so I think there's going to need to be some upgrades on these belts over here to turn these into red belts. We'll get a bit more wood coming through. A bit more effort is required over here. We also found that the peat mine that you can not see here because it has been completely depleted or had been completely depleted, and so that meant we weren't getting any fuel coming in over here. Now it all still looks as if we've got a bit of a shortage. I'm a little bit concerned by the quantities available over here. It may be that it's sort of playing a bit of catch up, or it might be that we need to increase the amount coming through here, because we do have quite a bit coming out over here, but there's not enough coming through, and I think this is due to rather slow belts. So a lot more upgrading of these to red belts is going to be required to get everything happy and satisfied and getting all of the resources coming through that we need. One interesting minor problem we did have is that when you dig up peat, you also get a certain amount of wood coming out with it, and so we had to be rather careful, because if this area jams up because we had so much wood coming out from the forestry over here, then this was jamming up, and if we weren't pulling enough through, then the peat could stop, and that actually ended up starving quite a lot of the factory of fuel at one point, which is obviously not a good thing. So I was able to fix that by connecting up some red cables here, reading the contents of the belt, and then passing it up all the way along here through these pylons to here, and then telling these machines that are producing additional wood pulp, telling those to run whenever there's more than 120 wood in those pieces of belt over there. So that will then put a little bit of extra load onto the wood supply, allowing some more to be pulled through and clearing up the jam over there. The final thing that I want to touch on Lignumis is that I've improved the system for making the rocket silos. Previously, we had just this machine here connected to these pipes and tanks and to the cargo landing pad, and the cargo landing pad was bringing over all the bits and pieces you need to make a rocket silo from Maluna, including bringing over all of the concrete in barrels. And we had to be careful about that, because concrete barrels will eventually spoil and turn into just blocks of concrete, and those are no good for making the rocket silos. So this was a very, very manual babysat process. We had to bring the stuff over very carefully and make sure everything worked. Now we've got large quantities of iron ore being dropped in, so whenever a ship pulls into orbit, if we need any iron ore over here, which we usually do, well actually we've got 50 at the moment, so we're okay at the moment, then some will be dropped down from that ship, assuming it can do. It'll land in here, it can then be crushed down, pass through here, and then made into the liquid concrete over here. Now that's we've got all the other ingredients around that we need, because you also need sand to be brought in, so we've got stone which can be crushed into sand, that's easy enough. We've got a little loop back here to deal with any stone that doesn't crush properly, and we've got plenty of water on this planet because it's nice and soggy, so that gives us all of the liquid concrete we could need, and that can be just pumped straight into here. There we go, concrete mix, 20,000 of it, lovely. But you need a few other things as well to make a rocket silo. You need pipes and you need steel, but because we've got iron being dropped in here, we can then crush that down into crushed iron. We can put that into a furnace along with some of the calcite, and we're bringing in loads of calcite, because I don't know if you remember, but we're now using that over here to make the molten gold much more efficiently than we were before, and so we can pull off a little bit of that to go into here to make some molten iron, which means we can make the steel, we can make the iron pipes. And so that's those two things. They can be brought up along the belt over to here. We also need blue circuits. We have a quantity of blue circuits on this planet, so I can request those from the chest you've seen us filling up north. And we also need electric engine units. So those are the one thing we are not making on this planet. So we could potentially drop in some copper and then go through the whole process of making them, because they are just steel and copper in various different forms, I think. Oh, and you need some lube as well. And they're kind of difficult. So those we are actually shipping in from Maluna. They're being dropped in from the spaceship. We're asking for 200 of them at a time, and they can then be passed through into here. Oh look, and there's the blue circuits arriving just as requested. We've got 24. Oh, there we go, that's all of them. So now we can start building that, and then the machine will start loading up with all the other things. And this brings us on to a slight problem that we're having with this, which is that we have the hot metals installed, which means, as you can see, we've got hot pipes coming through now, which can't be loaded into the machine. We've got hot steel coming through, which can't be loaded in. So it's now just sitting on the belt while it cools, and now it's just, we can't do anything else with it until some of this starts to chill a little bit, which is it's a minor problem. However, given how few of the launch silos we actually need, I don't really mind. I didn't think it was necessary to put in the cooling systems over here to make sure we had a big backlog of the pipes and the steel plates. It's easier just to let them cool on the belt, and to be honest, that's absolutely fine. This is going to be okay. And so that means we've now got some rocket silos available over here. We can then start putting them in as additional ones up here. And so once we've got a lot more blue circuit production, which is admittedly going to take a certain amount of effort because, well, as you can see, some work is required there, we'll be able to ship them out in even larger quantities as required. And I think that's going to be quite useful on some of the other planets. So some big expansion, I think, is going to be on the cards for this. The other big thing that's happened recently is that we've started making the orange science packs out on Vulcanus, and that's meant there's been a huge amount of research opened up that we can now start doing, and so, well, we've churned through quite a lot of that. So I know there's quite a lot of interest in the viewership about seeing what kinds of researches we've done, what's been unlocked for us, and it's been quite a while since I've actually looked into this. I think it's not since we actually got out to Vulcanus, and so we've been quite busy. The first thing to spot is that we researched tungsten carbide, and that required us to dig up a big volcanic rock, which gave us some tungsten ore. Matt taught us how to make carbon from sulfuric acid, and also to make tungsten carbide. Then making a tungsten carbide allowed us to research foundries, and that gave us all of these recipes. These are all the things you can cook in a foundry in one way or another, including making the actual foundry itself. Once we made our first foundry, we then unlocked the big mining drills, and getting that allowed us to go off and set up proper tungsten mines like these ones over here, because you can't dig this tungsten ore up with a normal mining drill. It's far too hard. So we needed the big mining drills, and that's allowing us to then start producing the stuff in bulk, and then move on to all the sort of the proper production of all the Vulcanian resources, rather than having to go out and chip out the little rocks and getting the small amounts of tungsten ore out of those. We also pulled a few pieces of calcite out of the ground. Once we had a little bit of that, that taught us how to then dissolve it in sulfuric acid to produce steam, and then how to turn the steam back into water. I'm surprised that took us to learning about calcite to do, but never mind, apparently it did. And also simple coal liquefaction, where we mix it with some coal and some acid, and we get some heavy oil out. So these are all very, very useful recipes for getting things up and running on Vulcanus. In fact, they're absolutely vital for getting things up and running on Vulcanus. It's a bit like the equivalent of learning about steam power when you're on Norvis. And so with this, we were able to get things up and running, and we were able to start producing things properly on this planet. We also discovered, in a slightly more modded way, we discovered sulfuric bacteria cultivation, and this is the way you get wood out on Vulcanus. So it gives you the recipes that allows you to turn acid and calcite and probably one or two other things into these pink bacteria that then decay down into wood, and that's allowing us to get a nice healthy supply of wood on this planet, because with this being planetary pioneers and with us having Lignumis installed, we need wood on basically every planet, because that's how you start making elementary things like belts, and we'd like to be able to produce all those sort of things. So there's been quite a lot of wood production going on over here, and it's been a little bit weird, but Tristan got that up and working by setting up this system over here, and as far as I'm aware, it is ticking over very nicely. We researched Military 4, which got us piercing shotgun shells and cluster grenades, neither of which I think we use in particularly large quantities, if at all. However, much more importantly, it then unlocked a few extra things for us, like uranium ammo, which is a lot like red or yellow or even brown ammo, but it does a lot more damage because you're using depleted uranium bullets or something like that, so they hit a lot harder. This is doing something like 48 damage per shot, as opposed to the about 20 of red ammo, and I think maybe about 10 and about 5 of the other two. So this is massively better, especially when you start attacking enemies which have some armor values. We developed destroyer robots, which are another type of military robot. You throw them out, they sort of follow you around, and they do a little bit of electrical damage to anything in their range. So, yay. I've never used these things very much. I don't really know how good they are, but they are certainly a thing that we've unlocked. While we're over here, we did electric weapons damage 1 and 2, which mean any electric weapons we have, which I think at the moment is restricted to just those destroyer bots, now do a bit more damage than they did before, so, you know, that's nice. It does bring it up to quite a lot of extra damage, actually, so that's a plus 110%, so the destroyer bots are now doing more than double the damage they did before. Also on the military front, we've got Power Armor Mark II, which is this is an interesting one, because it's clearly better than the Power Armor Mark I, but the question is it better than the prototype mech armor? And the difference basically comes down to the Power Armor Mark II, I think, is better armor in that it has more inventory space, it has more grid space, it has more defensive capabilities. However, the prototype mech armor allows you to fly over buildings and lava patches and so on and so on. So it's got the flight ability, which I think for all of us has trumped the additional grid space of the Power Armor Mark II. So I think we're all sticking with the prototype mech armor just because we like to be able to fly. It's quite interesting though to have that actual choice, because in vanilla Factorio, each armor level is a very obvious upgrade. So you get the light armor, then you get heavy armor, which is just straight up better, does more defenses. Then you get the modular armor, which is better defensively and allows you to put stuff in it. And the power armor is just better in every way. And Power Armor Mark II is better in every way. And then I think the mech armor is better in every way than the Power Armor Mark II. So it's quite nice in an interesting way to then have to make a decision whether you'd rather have flight or capacity. And I feel like perhaps there should be more of those sort of decisions to make. Finally, in the military area, we've also unlocked artillery, and this has been amazing. You've seen how effective that's been over on Norvis in the last couple of videos, but being able to actually push our defences out now without having to go around killing all the biters manually, and then being able to use the artillery to keep any expansion parties at bay, is an absolute game changer. It's meant that we've stopped getting constant warnings that we're being attacked. Things are just so much better now we've got the artillery up and running. We did research speeds 5 and 6, so those labs we've got sitting around down on Norvis can now work a bit more quickly, which is sort of nice because it means you don't need to use quite as many productivity modules to get the same sort of research speed out. Other than that, there isn't an enormous amount of benefit to having faster labs because you tend to be limited by number of science packs you can produce rather than by the number of labs you've got. Because labs are quick, easy and cheap to make, so you can just slap down as many of them as you want. It's making the stuff to go in them that's the expensive part. But that stuff that goes in them does include the productivity modules, so if you can save on a few of those, that's quite nice. We've got worker robot speed 6, so our construction and logistics bots buzz around a little bit more quickly than they did before, which is nice, because they're always a bit too slow. Because Tristan is heading out to Igris, we've started doing some of the research that he's going to need in order to get anything happening out there. So we've got glass working, which allows us to make magic glass out of stone, apparently. This is presumably an only on Igris type recipe, but it allows us to turn the stone that we're digging up over there, very, very slowly, into this magic glass. What we do with magic glass, we shall find out later, I'm sure. We've also got number 2 of glass working research, which allows us to make green circuits and also red science out of magic glass and copper in both cases. So that's interesting. I don't know whether that's going to be a better recipe than the one we're doing at the moment over on Norvis, or maybe potentially outsourcing to Vulcanus at some point, but it's an option, certainly. And we've got Glassworking 3, which has got us a way of making plastic out of light oil and magic glass. So that's going to be a way of making plastic on Igris, because Igris has enormous lakes of light oil, and apparently we're going to be able to make magic glass out of the stone that it has enormous amounts of. It's just very, very hard to dig it up. Continuing on with the Igrisian researches, we then pulled out Cermet, which allows us to make Cermet itself out of stone and light oil. And apparently that spoils to steel, so I guess this is going to be a slightly weird way of making steel. You can also make raw Cermite. I'm not quite sure what's going on with this chain of production, but I'm sure we'll find out once we get out to Igris and start playing with things over there. We can also synthesize sulfuric acid from some Cermet water and light oil, and I'm sure that's going to come in useful as well, because sulfuric acid is one of those things that is often needed. On the Lignumian front, we've discovered active noise cancelling, which allows you to build an active noise cancelling tower, which as far as I can tell is basically a speaker tower. It uses some standard Lignumian bits and pieces in order to make it, and then that allows you to do the active noise cancelling recipe. This recipe has a ridiculously long crafting time, just so that, because it doesn't actually produce anything, you just leave it ticking over. And when it's running, your active noise cancelling tower has a noise pollution output of -1,000 per minute. So essentially it's sucking in all of the pollution around it and by actively cancelling the noise out, which is quite interesting because it's part of the whole Lignumis using noise as a pollutant thing, and so you can have a noise cancelling tower to remove your pollution rather than just trying to muffle it with the walls, which is very interesting. And I suspect as we start to expand Lignumis more, we might get to the point where the walls just aren't absorbing enough of the noise, so then being able to chuck in these active noise cancelling towers is going to be very, very useful. They do use quite a lot of electricity though. 2 megawatts is quite a bit. We've picked up braking forces 6 and 7. Whoop-de-doo, our trains can now stop a little bit more quickly than they could before. We have done all of the astroponics productivity researches, so that's all the way from 1 to 5. That gets us quite a lot more wood out from our astroponics facilities, and this is going to be fantastic because those are the things that we've been putting on our spaceships in order to grow wood for the ammunition. And having those producing apparently 60% extra is going to mean that we can have somewhat fewer greenhouses on our spaceships, which is going to allow us to make them a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact. So that's quite nice. Similarly, we've done ore crushing productivities from 3 up to 6, which has now boosted our crushing productivity for every single type of ore up to plus 35%. And so that means we're getting probably an extra 50% from the crushing, because there's already the 5% chance of just getting your ore back again, plus a boost from the amount of crushed ore coming out, in this case tungsten ore. And then that also can be coupled with the plus 50% productivity you get from one of these crushers just because you're using a big crusher. So that says plus 80% productivity there on the side. That seems slightly odd to me because I was expecting that to be 85% because it would be the 35% and the 50% added together. I'm not quite sure why that's less than it appears to be. But there's going to be, then there's also going to be the extra 5% from the ores coming back out again. And so that's going to be, it's not going to be quite double, but it's going to be getting pretty close to that. And while I'm talking about productivity bonuses, we've done mining productivities all the way from 3 to 8, and 9 is currently running. So we've been really busy there. And mining productivity 9 is going to get us up to mining productivity boost of plus 90%. So we're getting almost twice as much out of our patches. And when you consider we're mostly using big drills now, which have a 50% resource drain, that means we're getting almost 4 times as much out of one of these patches as you would expect to from the basic numbers. So that's really, really good. We're getting that, and then when you couple that with the bonuses from the crushing, and then all the bonuses you get from going through foundries, this means that we now need much, much smaller amounts of resources in order to produce the metals that we're actually going to be using. And this is fantastic, because you tend to find in vanilla Factorio, certainly back in the olden days, that you spent a lot of time going out and finding new patches of ores to dig up. And having all of these productivity bonuses in there mean we can concentrate on more exciting stuff, like going off to new planets. And then just to push that even further, we've done loads of steel plate productivity. So we've done steel plate productivity up to number 4, we've got number 5 in the queue up here. And that gives us an extra 40% productivity bonus on producing steel. So again, steel becomes even cheaper. This isn't such a big deal out on Vulcanus because it's basically free coming out of the lava. However, everywhere else where we're producing steel, that's absolutely fantastic. We've also been working on rocket part productivity, and this comes split into different planets. So for example, this particular one I've got selected now is a Maluna rocket part productivity. So that's one you unlock by going to Maluna. We've then got some Vulcanus rocket part productivities, and then there will also later on be Gleba and Fulgora rocket part productivities, and just generic rocket part productivities. And all of these mean that when your rocket silos are building in order to try and launch their rockets, you've got this productivity bar underneath here. And so we're getting some decent numbers out of these, allowing us to use significantly less of all the resources to make rockets. And with the number of rocket launches we've got going on, having those savings is going to be extremely valuable. You can see our productivity is currently at 108%, which is very good. It means the rockets are slightly less than half the price they normally would be. And the same with making low density structures as well. All the different possible ways of making low density structures get a bit of a boost to their productivity. Getting up to, we've got at 40% so far, we're trying to work up to 50%. And that means, again, fewer resources required in order to build the parts, to build the rockets, to launch stuff up into space. We're very happy to say that we've invented cliff explosives, so now we can blow up all of those cliffs that are in the way, which makes Vulcanus a lot easier to deal with. It's allowing us to clear out space on Norvis as well, and it's also going to make some massive differences if and when we go back to Maluna, because that was a very cliffy moon. It does take calcite to make the cliff explosives in Space Age and Planetary Pioneers, so that is going to mean we're going to need to ship a fair amount of that around from Vulcanus, or gather it from other places potentially. But it does allow us to make quite a lot of cliff explosives, and they are extremely valuable, and we need calcite everywhere else anyway in order to start using the foundries properly. We've picked up sulfuric bacteria melting, and I think I talked about this in the last video. This is the thing that allows us to turn stone and a bit of lava into a bit more tungsten, and tungsten is very, very valuable on this planet, so being able to recycle the stone usefully is going to be extremely handy. We invented green belts. These are a chunk faster again, so you've got the yellow belts are a speed of 15 per second, then red 30, blue 45, and green are right up at 60. So these are decently quick. You can transport a bit more stuff on them than with the other belts, so it's good to have those unlocked. It's going to allow us to shift stuff around a bit more quickly. I don't think we've really used them very much anywhere yet, but they're going to be useful, I'm sure they are. Speaking of speed, we've researched Speed Module 3. These require tungsten carbide to make, which is a little bit of a fiddly thing, but I'm sure we'll be able to ship a load of that back over to Norvis and start making them there in massive quantities without too much difficulty. We've upgraded artillery shell damage to level 2, shooting speed to level 2, and range to level 5, so that makes the artillery that bit more effective. We can now devastate the biters over on Norvis with from a bit further away, and a bit harder and a bit faster, so that's great. The range is, of course, the most important one of these, although damage is also useful because if you can get it to the point where you can flatten a spawner with a single artillery shell, then it makes things much, much cheaper. We finally developed Posh Coal Liquefaction. That's the one that takes in a bit of heavy oil, granted, but then produces heavy oil, light oil and petroleum gas, so you're getting a lot more output for the amount of input you're putting into it. So that's going to be, I'm sure that's going to be useful. I think we switched a few of the machines over on Vulcanus to it. Actually, I've got a feeling that the gains weren't quite as big as I was expecting, but it is still probably a useful thing to have. And it's also got us the ability to make coal out of sulfur, carbon and water, which I'm sure is going to come in very handy at some point in the future. We've researched asteroid reprocessing, so we can turn one type of asteroid into another type of asteroid. That's going to be useful, but again, not just yet. But it's nice to have that under our belts for later. Way back on Maluna, we discovered a way to turn wood into petroleum gas, so that was handy. We've now got the advanced version of this, which turns alumina and cellulose, which comes from wood, into you get most of the crushed alumina back. That's nice to know. But also now you get heavy oil, light oil, and petroleum gas out. So this is basically you're getting the advanced oil processing for when you're making it from wood instead of when you're making it from crude oil. So I can see that being quite useful, especially if we start to need things like lube over on Maluna. And also, I'm sure it's going to be much more efficient. We're going to get much larger amounts of the oil out at the end of it. And last, and probably not really least, because it is going to be useful, we've gone stronger explosives 5 and 6, so that makes anything that goes go bang a bit harder, pretty much. So all types of rockets now do more damage, grenades do more damage, and landmines do more damage. Not artillery, interestingly. I see that has been split off, as we discussed earlier. But that's going to be useful for when we want to make things go bang. And that brings you up to date. So that's all of the researches we've been doing over the last few streams, and all of that has been unlocked now by us basically going out to Vulcanus and unlocking all of the science packs here. We're presumably going to get a similar sort of jump and loads of things available once we get Igris up and running properly, but that's at least some way off. That said, I feel like we're now more or less done with Vulcanus, so it's getting close to the point where we can all head over to Igris and start beating our heads against the very, very hard rock out there on that planet. So please make sure you come along to the streams on every Monday to watch how we're getting on with Igris. Holidays are over now, so they'll be every Monday as usual. Videos will be coming out every Thursday and Friday, talking about the sort of things we've been getting up to. And if you fancy giving it a go yourself, take a look out for the Planetary Pioneers mod, now available through the Factorio mod portal, which is a nice bundle of all of the mods that we're using. It allows you to grab that, install it, and then you can play along in the same world that we're using. I'm also still streaming Foundry on Wednesdays, so come along for that one as well. That's a sort of Factorio in a 3D Minecraft type world, which I'm finding very, very interesting and definitely enjoying. So yeah, please come along and check that one out as well. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.